My name is Yael Koifman. I'm a senior partner at Leisure Development Partners based in the UK. And I have the great pleasure today to run our little webinar discussion on developing city attractiveness through leisure and entertainment. During the session, we're basically going to talk about the city and attractiveness, but then also how leisure and entertainment can add to the attractiveness of the city center core. We have two experts here today who are going to draw from their experience in setting up leisure businesses in city center locations. And we're going to discuss really what were some of their experiences, what were the challenges that they faced, and how this can be used in other examples around the world. With us today, we have Peter Treideman, who's the Global Business Development Manager for Goboat, and then Plun van Dalen, who's the Marketing and Sales Manager for the Dutch Wheel Companies. I'm going to ask each of you now, if you wouldn't mind, just do a quick sort of introduction on yourself, your company, the types of projects that you do. Peter, perhaps we'll start with you.
Yes, thank you very much. So my name is Peter Treideman, and it's correct that I run global markets for the company Goboat. Goboat is a Danish company, and we specialize in small recreational water products. Behind me, you can see one of them, which is our Picnic 18 boat, and we have these around the world in locations like Melbourne, London, Copenhagen, and so forth. And what we really specialize in is making the water much more attractive for cities and our guests naturally. And this is something that I really look forward to talking about today in the topic. And just before passing on the torch, I just wanted to say that if you are a developer or a city official out there, we are definitely one of those that can help you with optimizing your waterfront potential. And again, we're a young company with more or less 5-6 years on the back. We also produce our own products, and we've served more than 1 million guests. So I feel that we have learned a bit here and there from our young history, but the potential on the water is tremendous, and I'm so excited to talk more about this today.
Peter, before we move on, can you just give us a little bit more information on how Goboat works? I mean, what do you guys do exactly? People might not be familiar with the concept.
Certainly. So in the cities where we operate, if you are one of our guests, you can go on one of our boats, and our boats are usually have the capacity to up to 8 people, and you can sail around the city without a license. And in most of the cities where we have the opportunity for it, we run on not only electrical vessels but also solar powered. And so sustainability is a key concept in everything that we do. And the reason why I didn't probably come down yet to talk about one of the products that we have now, which is the boating, which is our starting one, is because we're also expanding our product portfolio to also include winter products and products that have higher capacity of people and so forth. But it started with the smaller boats that have now developed. So it's a very enjoyable experience to see your city from the water side in a new and a clean way.
Cool. And Plun, I think, is there anything you'd like to do to introduce yourself before we share your video?
Yeah, I think it's good. My name is Plun van Dalen, as mentioned. I'm trying to sort of develop the global market for giant observation wheels in a different wheel, where destination is really the thing we try to develop. It's not the wheel, is part of the concept. And it's sort of fun to work with, to see Peter as well, because his attraction would be a perfect fit with our wheel. Wheels are very known, very old, over 125 years ago. The first wheel was opened in Chicago, and it has been popular since, still all around the world. What we try to sort of change is to make it not like a carnival attraction, but into a very nice observation attraction that allows to create, sometimes we call it a shortcut city tour, where you can have a different view of the city and sort of prepare yourself. Okay, let's go there and let's go there. but also just being in a wheel is fun. And the challenge is to sort of combine it into a destination with other attractions as well. And that's been a really difficult challenge because most people know the wheel from carnivals, from Christmas markets, from attraction parks, and they have a perception which we try to change.
That sounds like a perfect introduction for your video. Then I'm gonna put that on right now.
Check. Yeah. All right, let's do it.
Great. Thank you for that. I think one of the things I want to touch on is, you mentioned it, Plön, and I think I'd like to go in that direction, is what's interesting about both your concepts is that you are giving people a different way to look at a location, you know, either from the water or from above. One thing you mentioned, Plön, was that the two of them would work very well together. And I actually agree. And I think there's a very good example of that that's been around for years, is if you look at Paris. And you look at the Eiffel Tower and the Bateau Mouche, which are right there next to each other. So you get to look from above, and then you get to go in the water afterwards. So I guess the question is, in your experience, and this goes to both of you, when you've set up an operation, have you seen it change people's perspective of that location? Like, what specific examples can you give us about how it might have changed people's perception? Peter?
Oh, sorry, I thought it was a question for Bloom. In our experience, when we, I could give you an example, for instance, from the starting city of Copenhagen, where Goboat was founded. In the area where it was set up, which is called Islandsbryggen, nothing was really going on, and it wasn't a place you would go for any sort of recreational activity and leisure, if you will. But that has now changed, and so Goboat was the first part of that, combined with a recreational harbor bath that was also developed by the city. And then further along, shops came by, and in my opinion, you would probably say in a fairly dead area in regards of retail was also relived, if you will. So the water is a great enabler in that way to revitalize areas that used to have a focus for, from the water side at least, logistics, which has now moved out of the cities, and that is what we focus a lot upon.
Okay. What about you, Plön? Are there any, specific examples where you've seen your development come in and really change the perception of the location?
I think an interesting example is what is called National Harbor. It's a small place just outside of Washington, D.C. They developed it as a sort of a place, a destination with a conference center, and really when they put the wheel, which is positioned on a pier in the marina in the river, it added the perspective of seeing the sights of Washington. So you can see this obelisk, and you can see the White House. You can see, and that made it sort of part of Washington, because they call it the Washington Wheel, but actually it's National Harbor. And the other interesting thing is that when they developed this project, the first years it was doing okay, but I've learned from the owner or the developer of that area that with the wheel, they saw a significant sort of change in growth of visitors. So they allowed, or they made the wheel sort of be one of the initiators of more people. So it did add people to the area, plus it did combine it with the city of Washington, which was not possible before.
And let's talk about people actually at this point in time. You know, in your situation, Peter, do you find that the majority of your visitors are more residents that are interested in exploring their city in a different way, or are you getting actually international tourists as well, or who are the majority of the people that come and use your facilities?
Yes, good question. So on a global scale, we probably see 60 to 70%, which are local, depending on from location to location. And I think that brings two positive values to cities, in my opinion. So one off is, of course, you're much more pandemic recovered, if you will, in case such a situation were to happen once again. You have a strong foothold with the local population. But another thing that's also positive is that you are much more close to the citizens of your city. And we really enjoy that. We enjoy both segments, of course, but it is something that surprised me before I joined the company, honestly, that the percentage was that high.
And so you're really seeing an impact in terms of a positive benefit to local residents.
Absolutely. Most people around the world haven't seen their own city from the water side. Yeah. And that still blows my mind, because I always enjoyed the water in many ways. And and our boats are usually without or actually all the cities where we are without a certificate. So you don't need a license from having gone to sailing school or whatever it might be in your city. So it's for everyone. And seeing people be so joyful of seeing their own city that they have lived in for decades sometime, right? And seeing it from the water side and bring a whole new concept to them. It's wonderful.
What about the from the perspective of the wheel, who do you find the majority of your guests are? Are they more local residents, or maybe residents that have visiting friends and relatives and showing it off, or tourists, or who do you see basically?
I think it's a mix, and to be honest, we develop and manufacture wheels. We're not into the operation of it, so information about numbers is typically difficult to get. But what you see and what I hear from our clients is that, especially the first year, you see a peak in visitors, because all the local people will go and want to see their city from a different perspective. That will sort of slow down, and then they will come back with friends and family. But I think the main sort of target group still is tourists or people visiting. And it could be sort of people from the area or people from other places in the country or the world. I think it's once you've done it once, I think it's fun. I can see with a boat it's more fun to do another time compared to going in the wheel. Although there is a lot of occasions where you can go in the wheel, and you saw a picture in the movie where you have a dinner option. That's really an attempt to sort of make it sort of a redo thing. So you go there again with your girlfriend, or a special occasion, you have dinner in the sky, and that creates an experience. So what we try to do is to add other options to the wheel to sort of still get more visitors from residents.
So that's so in that case, for example, you know, it's not just the wheel, as you said. You're trying to create a destination. You'll add additional, you know, businesses or things to the overall mix. So there is definitely benefit to surrounding businesses in that case. Have you seen that in regards to your existing operations?
I think that's key to our concept. The concept is, okay, it's not just the wheel, it's the stuff around it. And in either that's because the area, Montreal, for instance, you have the whole old port of Montreal, which is a tourist destination. You have different attractions. There's a zip line across the wheel. There is a rope climbing course. There is a museum. There is a big event space, and there's lots of things to do in that part. And the wheel adds to all that. It will draw people to the place because you hear about the wheel and it's sort of intriguing. You want to go in there. There is a mini destination around the wheel with a bar, a rooftop terrace, and bistro, and people will come just to have dinner, maybe not to ride the wheel. So definitely that's key to our concept. It's not just a wheel. And in that sense, we have two types of projects. One is that you have a destination and you want to benefit and just make money. The other is, okay, you want to create a destination. So if a place is not really drawing tourists, then you may want to put the wheel and create your destination. And there is images in the movie I shared showing that type of projects. Those are a little bit more difficult from a money perspective, because then you need to invest in the wheel, which is not a small investment, and you have to wait for the revenue to come. But then that could be a different concept. Okay, you want to just cover your cost and until the whole area becomes very profitable, and that's where you make your money. In other places like Chicago, it's just a money machine. It's just they just invest the wheel. You got 1 million visitors paying $15 a ticket, so you generate 15 million in revenue. There is no operational cost or limited. It's a big money machine.
But I think Chicago is interesting though, because it is, you know, that's such an iconic sort of element. Like even the old wheel, which they sold off, I believe in Branson, Missouri, was still painting itself as the Chicago wheel.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how they were selling themselves. So it's it is the whole Navy Pier thing is it's a bit of a different sort of situation, I think. But that does bring up like the question of water, and Peter, you mentioned water briefly. You know, in my experience, when we look at most cities around the world, cities turn their back on the water, and that is for the logical reason that historically the water was used for shipping. You'd have warehouses, you'd have factories. It was dirty, it was disgusting, and as a result, there aren't that many places that have really good access to water. What we're finding now, of course, is you find areas that might have been old warehouses or old shipyards or whatever, which are underutilized brownfield sites that are opportunities clearly for redevelopment. In both of your, clearly water is important to you, Peter. That you couldn't function without it. But I'm just asking, Plön now, does being in a waterfront location, does that help you? In regards to the overall attractiveness of the wheel, and what are the other sort of key factors that play into your location decisions?
I think water is interesting because, naturally people tend to draw to water. I'm from Holland, so I like water, but you see it all over the world. And as you mentioned, it's an area where I think from city perspective, it makes sense. It's an area that is sort of not used at the moment. So if you can develop it into an area where people want to go, that's good. And in the end, it's key for a good wheel project is the location and it's the people. So you want to be where the people are or when the people want to go. And again, that's why I mentioned that there would be a good combination with the Goboat and the wheel. You go to the wheel, and after the wheel, you go into the boat.
I see a future partnership being formed right here before our eyes.
It's amazing. And we agree. We've already talked about this, so it's.
Oh, have you? Excellent, excellent. But I think, looking at that, as you said, there is a challenge when you go into sort of underprivileged zones and things like that, and people want to be where the people are. They don't want to. You want to invest where the people are. You don't want to invest where people aren't. But then at the same time, by adding this leisure, these attractions and creating this new destination, you can actually create that new place that people want to go. What are the key sort of challenges or barriers that you run into when you go into a new location? And whatever comes to mind, be it funding or city red tape or permits or whatever the case may be. What to you specifically, Peter? What are the key barriers that you seem to be running into?
Yes. I think I also like to give, for that answer, I'd like to give a bit of background shortly about myself. So I used to work in a capital fund in real estate before, and I have a background in finance. So I knew little to nothing in regards of the water in the past. And I did 6 months due diligence before joining Goboat, and saw the potential and so forth. But the biggest mistake that I made by far was to underestimate how hard it is to attain a mooring license. So a mooring license is basically where can you have your boats. And so it's not the funding. There's plenty of liquidity in the market to do cool things and interesting things, but we often experience in my team that cities want to help. They have a introductory organ of the city to bring in foreign investments and so forth, but then to actually provide us an area to operate from. Usually, the two entities in cities don't collaborate too well together, and then we basically figure out, okay, we actually have to do it on our own, and then basically work very hard to find a place to operate. And so for our sake, that is by far the biggest barrier to growth, and that's for all parties. That's for us as a business. It is for a city to become more attractive. It is to bring more jobs to cities. It is to bring more taxes to cities, and so forth. So that is a big problem, honestly, that we see from our chair across the planet. That when it comes to the water side, there is very little attention on it from both cities and developers. Mm-hmm. And again, with good reason, because there's so much more land elsewhere, if you will. But this is a different kind of real estate play, in my opinion, because if you think of the cities of New York or London or Amsterdam, if you will, there's so much water, but the laws that you have around this area, and also the zoning, if you will, is often, if granted, much more flexible than normal zoning, if you will. So the potential is huge, but the amount of money being allocated to actually make sure that the potential is fulfilled is limited. But I'm a positive person, so I hope that it will change for the better in the future.
What about you, Plun? What do you find is the single largest sort of barrier that you run into when you're trying to create a new destination?
Well, in the wheel business, we say there's three things you need. You need a good location, you need a permit, you need the money. And typically one of the three doesn't work. So either you have a good location, but you can't get a permit, or you can get a permit, but it's not a good location, or you have everything, but you can't find the money. And that's and actually interesting, because Peter mentioned the water. That's one of the tricks sometimes used to say, okay, well, if we put something in the river, then you have to deal with port authorities and river authorities, which is not the city. And then you try to get around sort of the permitting thing. And the biggest challenge we then face with the city is really the perceptions people have. So you have to try to sort of sell the concept of a destination wheel, which is really nice and integrated in its environment. And it's not like the attraction park. And that makes it really important for us to sort of work with visuals and show people what it will look like, and that it looks like something really nice with, for instance, a Goboat and an immersive experience about the culture of the city or the history, and adding other stuff to make it so, okay, it's not just a wheel, but it adds to the education of the area or other stuff, just to convince the people. And in order to get that, you need the local network. And that's really, you need to know the mayor, you need to know the council person that is involved in certain parts of the thing. If you don't, it's impossible. And that's why selling wheels is challenging, because if I would go to, I don't know, Melbourne and put a wheel, I need to know the person in Melbourne that deals with this. I need to know the city to understand, okay, this is the best location. Because if you put the wheel like a half a mile away, then it may not work. It's that critical.
So it really does have to do with not just local knowledge of the location, but also local connections.
Connections, the network, yeah.
Speaking to the right people.
Yeah, and in that sort of, and that's all to deal with local authorities and getting permits. And I think that's really the biggest challenge.
Okay. Where are you looking next? I was gonna.
Looking next for locations?
Yeah. What's next on the list?
I have a whole bunch. It's looking at the Bahamas, looking at Hawaii, Egypt, Saudi, Vietnam. It's all over the world.
So you're all over. And what about you, Peter? Are you sticking to Europe, or are you going other locations?
We're mostly focused on Europe for now, but again, Australia is a wonderful example of how an inbound lead turned into, you know, one of the best markets that we probably have. So we're always open, but and we get probably a lead every second week from around the world, maybe more. But the thing is, it often comes down to, unfortunately, is we have to, you know, we started with saying, is this the right partner in regards of, you know, do they have the right capabilities and so forth, in regards of the money and the network and so forth. And now we actually start with, do you have mooring? And if there's no mooring, it's probably too hard for us to initiate a partnership.
Yeah.
And, you know, some come back and say they have it, and some don't. But we're looking for Europe for now. But we have a lot of countries in scope where the opportunity is tremendous.
Well, I asked that question of both of you because I was just a bit curious. I mean, I know, Plone, you said that sometimes you just sell the wheel and that's it, but you're trying to focus more on creating destinations and a mix of different attractions. So I'm just curious, when you start looking at different markets, other than clearly having to have local connections in order to get through the red tape, do you adjust your business model from location to location, or is it pretty much the same approach, just making sure you have the right partner in the right location?
It depends a little bit. I think it depends on the type of person you deal with. What you see is you have a lot of showmen that sort of are in the industry of attractions, and they've been putting their carnival wheel or in that sort of their business. So they have a different thinking, but you also have people like working on a project in Texas where someone owns property and he thought, okay, what can we do with the property? Okay, let's put a wheel. And that's how it starts. So you have to learn people, okay, to educate them. Okay, this is a wheel. This is how the business works. This is how you sell tickets. This is how the money flows. And that's quite of a challenge. Then, so depending on the location, you can see, okay, is it critical on how the destination concept gets across or not? So then we have to spend a lot of time and effort on making visuals and other stuff. But that's more like, and I have to say that most of our leads, or probably all of them, are inbound leads. It's people approaching us and then having the idea. So they already have a thought, okay, let's put the wheel, and then it's assessing, okay, is it interesting enough? Is it worth spending the time and effort? What you get is, if you have hot cities, then at some point you get 5 leads from the same city because it's being talked about and people want to jump in, and then you have to figure out, okay, who do I work with? You get cities putting out tenders, and then you want to deal with the right people. That's really challenging in an international environment.
And from the, I mean, just Peter, what about from your side? Do you change things up, or are you a franchise model? Do you do different partnerships in different locations? How does it work exactly? And basically, who approaches you?
Yeah, so we work out of a license model where you buy the license and the expertise from our learnings and our concept, and in my opinion at least, most importantly, you become part of a network, because that's often how we see the industry, is that there's a lot of fragmentation of mom and pop businesses within the water space, and we really benefit from being a global network of global partners. In regards of the business model, it is open for debate for every location we go in. Some it's a JV partnership, others we take everything under the Goboat umbrella, and others it's a license model. So it depends really on the partner and what they need. Yeah.
Okay. And then, I mean, I guess the question along those lines is, you know, you're clearly, I think most of the people you're dealing with are from the private sector, not so much the public sector in terms of partnerships. But what could cities, like from the public sector perspective, if they wanted to develop or redevelop some areas and get you involved, what could they do to make themselves more attractive to you actually coming in?
It's
from our, sorry.
Yeah, I think for a wheel, it's important that you allocate a good location. So you're thoughtful of a location that actually makes the business model work, which means there should be enough traffic. And then the other thing is, okay, well, the question is, okay, what's in it for the city? So that often is like a lease. So you pay a monthly fee for using the square meters. And if you want to really make it work, then you need to be reasonable on the amount of money.
Yeah.
I think a good example is the city of Gdansk, where the mayor has been very, very much helpful, in favor of putting the wheel. He's been really trying to sort of identify good locations, and they started with a temporary wheel which moved around, and now it moved to its sort of a location which is really a good location. They pay hardly any monthly fees, and that makes it work. And so you have to sort of be helpful in that sense, finding the location and the permitting.
Yeah. And I think from that perspective as well, it's important that they understand the economic impact of,
Yep.
you know, in this case, either the wheel or the boats, because it's not just, you're not by yourself the only revenue stream. They will be getting an economic impact from the people going there and spending not just on the attraction itself, but in the surrounding area. I don't know, Peter, when you, in your business model, are people able to get off of the boats and like go to a restaurant for lunch, then come back into their boat, or do they have to stay on their boat the whole time?
Depends on the city regulation, but in the areas or in the cities where it's allowed, yes. I would also like to add that you know, in regards of spicing up a city or an area, we had a really good collaboration with European Land and Trust in London, who actually started a bit reversed, if you will, thinking of how can we develop this area, went to us and, you know, saw us as and I think they call it an area enabler. So basically, you know, instead of, you know, at the time, the Paddington Canal was probably not the most seen attraction for people in London, both visitors but also locals. But seeing that side from the river made the area of Paddington also much more attractive, because now you are part of creating that destination. So I think that is that's something we'll see more of, is both developers and cities starting to think of enabling areas with professional partners, and hopefully invite more in for tenders, if you will, because that's really what I feel, that every time, you know, there's so much potential lost on the table because there's no invitation for international partners. So a lot of cities, you know, we look at it and we think, wow, great city, what a lot of potential here is just left on the table.
So it is basically about the city starting to think outside their own borders and starting to look at, you know, international partners that could come in and really change the landscape, as opposed to just going to the regular players every time.
Yes, they are not utilizing their potential, and we're not talking just a little bit, but we're talking a tenfold that they're missing out on. Yeah.
What about, because I have to bring it up, you know, it's at the back of our head, and, you know, it needs to be touched on. COVID. How has it impacted both of your cases? If it has, Plön, what have been the impacts of COVID on your current operations and your future?
I think if it comes to sort of selling wheels, it sort of came to a halt. Working on some projects in Central America, in Mexico, Panama, and that basically stopped. So we had deals, but they said, okay, well, sorry, we can't move forward. And I'm convinced it will sort of pick up again, and those projects will move on, but it will take another year before that's going to happen. So that's hurting. I think if you look at the business model of a wheel, you see different things happening. One of the things is that the cities see their tourism sort of drop dramatically, and they're thinking, okay, how do we get out of this? So we need to do something to make things move. So what I hear from the market is that cities are more open to propose good deals and to give the permits required. So that's positive. The other thing is that they see the wheel as like a post-pandemic sort of sign of, okay, things are positive, and especially a wheel, because it's a very visible thing as opposed to a boat, which is probably more practical and more easy to implement. But the wheel is really something that people see, and I have a few projects where basically that is mentioned. The city is really pushing those projects. Okay, well, once this pandemic is gone, we need to have something that will draw the attention.
So sort of be a positive symbol that, you know, we're moving on to better days and all that kind of stuff.
And that's and as an attraction itself, I think the wheel is a very COVID-friendly attraction. It's not like you have massive packs of people. You can easily sort of maintain your social distancing. The gondolas are sort of, yeah.
They're like they're bubbles.
Yeah, so it's
Tourist
relatively
bubbles.
easy, and it's
Yeah.
considered to be sort of a COVID-friendly
Yeah.
solution or attraction.
What about you, Peter? Have you felt any sort of impact from COVID?
Certainly, but I would say overall fairly good conditions we've faced. I will say though that the picture behind me is from our location in Melbourne, and Australia right now is still facing tough regulation from the pandemic, unfortunately. So that is definitely a market that has been highly affected. Every other market has been affected as well, but we definitely share the same benefit as Dutch Wheels in regards of being smaller groups, and we also have the benefits of being outside, and again we're not as exposed to tourists. It did affect, but actually we saw a surge in local residents that wanted to do things locally. So we're actually fairly well on track, and now we're also starting to see offerings from destinations that before were very busy with other things, but now really starting to rethink, okay, we might want to have some products that are more catering to locals and also from the outside, and I also feel that cities are starting to become more aware of having leisure opportunities that is more closer to the normal habitat of being outside in one way or the other. So I would say we're quite positive.
It's interesting because it struck me during this conversation, and I'm going to go back to something that you said earlier, Plun, which is that you have to convince people that a wheel is not an attraction park, that you're creating a separate destination and things like that. But actually, I'm going to throw that around on its head and say maybe city centers should think of themselves as theme parks. Because what do theme parks have to do? They have to constantly reinvest in new rides and attractions just to keep the same level of attendance that they do on a regular basis. So, I mean, as one who does a lot of financial consulting for theme parks, I can tell you, you do have to keep reinvesting, not just in maintenance, but in new rides and attractions to keep people coming back. And maybe city centers should take a different perspective and look at themselves as theme parks, and they have to reinvest in their downtowns and their city centers and their waterfronts and bring in new attractions such as, a destination wheel or a Goboat or both, or a blend of different things in order to sort of create those new cores. That's just, my little 2 cents, but I think we sort of have to wrap up, but I'm just going to give you guys each an opportunity. If there's a couple of final points you'd like to make, this would be the time to do so. Peter?
Yes, we only have one point that we really would like to share, and that is that if there is developers or city officials, hopefully having been inspired by this very, very nice webinar, and thank you very much for Dutch Wheel, by the way, to also sponsor it, is that if there is now an interest in what can one do with the water, and there is ownership of waterfront area or mooring, I think, reach out to us, and we would love to hear your ideas and what can be done and so forth. And we do that all the time with developers and cities officials. Most times we can help one way or the other, even if it's not with our own products, but then we know, who to talk to. So that will be our key point. And again, like the water is just, it's a wonderful source. I'm never going to leave it because it's just, there's so much potential, and we're not going to be done with it during our lifetime. So thank you very much for having me on the webinar.
Thanks, Peter. Plun, do you have any sort of final thoughts or points you'd like to make?
I think I'm pretty much aligned with Peter's comments. Okay, well, you really need to think about an area. Water is cool. In general, I think the challenge is to think in destinations. And I sort of liked your view as well. So, okay, well, we need to see the city as a park, and that's what we try to do with our master plan. Is to say, okay, well, you need to look at the thing in a bigger context. And that makes it interesting, not only for the city, but also for whoever is operating the wheel. And I think that's really a big challenge that I've heard also from architects on last year's MIPIM session, where one of them said, okay, well, we have to make this big development and we need to put an attraction in, but what do we do? And I think that's really big. The biggest challenge we see is to get to the minds of the urban designers, the city planners, whoever is involved in creating a place to enjoy and to live, to make that enjoyable, to think about the options they have. To have the Goboat as an attraction, to have a wheel done in the right way as an option, and there's many other attractions that sort of make sense in an environment. Making a city into an attraction park without making it an attraction park.
Into an attraction park, exactly. Yeah.
And I'm convinced we'll get there, but it will take some time and effort.
Going. Well, okay. On that note, though, I'd like to thank both of you very much. It was a very interesting conversation, and hopefully, as I said, we'll see a partnership of the two in some new destination, and hopefully, I'll see you both in real time and in the real world at some point in time in the future.
Looking forward, and thank you very much for your professional way of managing this conversation. But I'm sure we both would be spending hours if you let us talk.
Yeah. I agree. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks both.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I think we're done now.